Hello and welcome everybody, I'm a Proper Variant and this is Dev Diary number 98 and 100 for CK3. Those are the ones that we're going to be covering today, because today we have a question that really drives me crazy, that I really want to see answered, that can't be answered here, but I want to talk about it. And that question is, where next for CK3? 98 was released before the patch, before the update released, and 100 was released just today. So this is, Dev Diary basically looking into the future, which is also why I would like to bring this entire topic up. I want to take a look at 98 in particular because there are some features in here that now that the patch, now that the update is out, we can take a bit more of a nuanced view on it. When this came out, there was a lot in here, for example, the topic of the map updates, the shared head of faith that we already knew about, so back then I decided not to cover it, but now I'm saying, you know what, this gives me ideas for what could be a cool thing to do next, but, let's explore that as we go. I know that some of you, maybe many of you, are waiting for a review of the Fate of Iberia on this channel. I gotta tell you right now, I'm not really planning that. I'm working on other content as we speak. But I can give you a quick opinion if you want. Fate of Iberia, I think, in the dev diaries, from what we saw there, is essentially what we got, and it is a whopper. It's a massive update for, $7. The free update and, of course, the paid update both are absolutely incredible. Northern Lords, back in the day, I said it's like a 7 or 8 out of 10. It's a good DLC, nothing wrong with it. It adds a lot, it's nice flavor, and it makes it so, and I think most people will agree, after they played Northern Lords, they said to themselves, I don't really want to play anywhere else. It's just too much fun. It really added a lot of value to these regions. Fate of Iberia said, Northern Lords, that was absolute garbage. I would like to dump on this. And it did. It took it out, and I gotta tell you, I think Fate of Iberia, in its density, in its value, and when it comes to the fundamental free update that it allowed to be developed, which is the mechanic, of course, around struggles. We talked about this in various places. Wokek, said that this was Wokek's rough idea, and then they went on, the entire team, they refined it further, they moved on, and they made it into this generalized system. And this is something that the team has always talked about. They want to make generalized systems rather than something that is just really valuable for one region, for one particular interaction. This mechanic is something I think that they can carry forward that should allow them to add a lot of content in other areas when necessary and when applicable. But more importantly, I think this makes it so that it's going to be very difficult to make new flavor packs and have them measure up against this, even though this is also a DLC and this is also a free patch that has a lot of bugs. I think this is something that has to be pointed out. As much as I'm absolutely in love with the features and with the feature density, I think maybe at times, the struggle can even feel a bit overwhelming. At that point, you just have to tune it out. You just have to say, I'm just going to do my business. I see, it's a bit of a tangent, but I see a lot of comments that basically go, oh, I resolved the struggle in 80 years. How boring. What do I do now? And the answer kind of is, you probably should have roleplayed, right? This was a huge feast for roleplayers because they can carry on the struggle for hundreds and hundreds of years if they really want to. But when it comes to the bugs, it has to be said, the AVX machines, that's very unfortunate. So very old hardware just can't even run the game right now. They're working on it. Hopefully they can actually figure that out. But that is a topic I think that is definitely very frustrating. Luckily you can roll back, but in particular when you were anticipating this content, then that is quite saddening. At the same time, there are some bugs in there. We will talk about it as well when it comes to the Dissolution Faction, for example, that I'm not sure will be fixed soon enough, but on a different level are also just some bugs where it's just very sad that somehow this wasn't, fixed beforehand. I do think you can hold the bugs to a good degree against the DLC. Obviously, it's temporary, though. This also has to be pointed out. I ultimately would say this is a must-have DLC. This is a must-have patch. How could you not have the patch unless you can't run it? But where I'm coming from is, I think, all in all, this is incredible work. I'm very, very happy with the speed that this came out with in comparison, of course, to how long the Royal Court took. Although, if you follow the channel, then you will know that I feel very positively about the actual result of the Royal Court itself. Am I still peeved about the question of no free courtrooms for people that own the Royal Court? Absolutely. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, if you want a summary, a real quick one here, then I would say this DLC, this free patch, is exactly what they advertised, what they talked about in the dev diaries, what we talked about when we discussed the dev diaries, and I think that's wonderful. Think back to Northern Lords, where we learned about the features of the DLC after the release. This is a great release. The bugs are to be expected, which is why I'm also waiting with our roleplay playthrough, right? I'm waiting to actually continue this on 1.6, or well, no, I should say we will be continuing it for the time being on 1.5.1.1, and once they bring out the patch, we'll of course try to go to 1.6 and see whether we can do that. With that being said, let's take a look at the two dev diaries that are the topic of this video, and that is 98 and 100. 98, the Castle's Foundation starts with clan contract explanations. Clan contracts is a topic that has been around for quite some time, in the sense that many people said clan just feels very unsatisfying, because you look at it and yes, you can get more levies and more obligation if you make people happier, you marry people into it, and that's fine, but the actual potential depth that you can get from this compared to, you know, being feudal is fairly limited. What we get here now is something that, when it comes to how much of a plaster, so how, you know, permanent, how solid it is, I think it is quite comparable to royal codes being expanded to tribal codes, because that is ultimately just something that was done to, you know, react, I think, in my opinion at the very least, that was done to react to the criticism that came from people that only play tribal and said royal code doesn't give me any content. This is similar, I think, right? This is done ultimately because it's just a slacked down version. Just look at it, right? It's really, really nice to have, and I think this is a valuable addition. I personally don't think that tribal codes are a valuable addition, but I do think this is a valuable addition. But I think it has to be said that this is a slacked down version done so that you have something in that place. So where feudal contracts would go in feudal societies, you have this now. It's less than feudal contract, but it's better than nothing, right? And this is something that really made me think. Ultimately, when we look at the clan government, when we look at the feudal government, we will have to consider, we have to realize, right, that what we are looking at are governments that are highly, highly idealized. And it makes sense, don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying, oh, CK3 gets governance in the Middle Ages wrong. Obviously it does, because it's so complex. There were so many different ways of governing over the time period that CK3 covers, and over the different cultures, societies, and realms, of course. However, I do think that there is a lot of room to expand where CK3 could expand, and this is a band-aid, this is a plaster, this is not what I would want, but, you know, when we talk about future content, when we talk about what could come next, I mean, there are so many topics that could come next, it's just that comes with the depth of this topic, of this area, and of course of this game. But I was thinking, what would be a really nice update, and the clan contracts made me think of this, would be much more modular and society-oriented forms of governance. I'm not necessarily really talking about the pure percentage modifiers. Think more like when it comes to the effect that you're taking, think of, for example, cultural traditions that enable you to do certain things. I talked about it as well in my warfare theory video for CK3, where I said it would be cool if there was really a massive significance in me switching from actually having freemen serve in my army to switching to serfs, where they, you know, are obligated in a different way, where different people are obligated to actually show up to my campaigns. I also said, you know, that, for example, in England, of course, scutage became a big topic, in France as well, where as a noble person, as a landholder, you could simply pay rather than actually send, you know, your family or your subjects. These are the sort of transitions that you kind of can emulate, but it's not something the game directly supports. And at the same time, it has to be said that the difference between tribal and feudal isn't actually that sizable in, you know, this society, or rather in this time frame. Well, in any time frame, really. It's just a question of the strictness of the hierarchy and the way that it's organized. But in many cases, it was a long transition period, rather than the, you know what, we've reached a state, boom, I'm feudal. Which is obvious. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, again, it just serves the purpose of, you know, having, I think, governance present to begin with. This is, of course, a CK2 thing. The way CK3 does governance is, in general, something that CK2 also did in this way. But where I'm coming from is basically, I would love it if a modular, reform-based, society-based, realm-based, maybe culture-based, it's difficult to ascertain where you would start and where you would end with this, but if we could get a much more interesting governance interaction, rather than, hey, you know what, we have a select-down version of vassal contracts, I would be delighted by that. I think that could be an idea. I just wanted to bring it up. In the actual gameplay, as I said earlier, I think the clan contracts are, again, slacked down, but hey, they do a much better job than what clans could do before. So that's pretty cool. The Dissolution Faction, I'm kind of just, I don't know. I think the Dissolution Faction, I understand why it exists, right? Obviously, it's the Umayyads, and you can apply this in a broader variation as well. You could theoretically say that some of the gameplay rules, where if you hold land outside or exclusively outside of the area where your title is, then it can be, your title would be destroyed. That is one of the game rules in CK3. And these all scratch the similar itch that Dissolution Factions also scratch. It has to be said, right now, Dissolution Factions are deeply unbalanced. I've seen reports where nobody ever gets dissolved. I've seen reports where everybody gets dissolved because the AI is just mad. No matter which direction it comes from, Dissolution Factions are something that I feel could lead to a different topic of rework. What do I mean here? So again, the first idea, which is why we're even dealing with number 98 here, is clan contracts. What about governance, DLC, or, well, free content in general, where you say governance works differently to begin with? The way you reform your government system is different than clicking the Realm Authority button, right? Dissolution Factions, I think, would be significantly cooler and more interesting if the faction system, the internal politics system, got reformed. This could be a part of course, a government overhaul, but where I'm coming from here is that factions right now exclusively are there so that angry people can demand something, then they either are strong enough, you can either buy them off, or they rebel and potentially, you know, overthrow you, get whatever they want. The way factions worked, of course, in real life isn't that you would just handpick individual members. Sometimes, if there were people that had a common cause, you could actually negotiate with them. You could talk to them, right? Let's say a Dissolution Faction. What if you just are in a situation where you give them much more autonomy? Now, you could say that is a Liberty Faction, but that's the deal, right? If we had a situation where we can actually interact with factions more, not necessarily exclusively, because obviously valuing the individual person is very, very important. It's a key design pillar of CK3. But I would like it if factions got a bit of a bigger character than just pay me off or die, basically, right? The bugs aside, whether this works perfectly well or not, it doesn't really matter. Again, it's a temporary issue to me. I completely recognize, of course, that in the game currently there are some issues that I think are very easy to see, right? But when it comes to the Dissolution Faction, I am sort of lukewarm on it as of right now, because I do think that the independence questions, or well, rather, let me phrase it in this way. I'm lukewarm on it because when there was an empire, and as it reads here, anything detracting from a realm's unity will increase the risk of Dissolution Faction forming. That means short reigns, low cultural acceptance, war losses, and unallied vassals will all be dangerous to king and empire tier rulers. When I read this, I just have to say, there's never been a situation in CK3 where I looked at a realm and I said you shouldn't exist, right? They already have this penalty. If you have been in debt for 10 years, you get this huge opinion penalty, people declare independence, you will dissolve, right? It's just a bit more of a gradual process rather than now with the Dissolution Faction. I'm lukewarm on it. I would honestly be much happier had they gone and, for example, added factions that let me demand title succession laws, such as electives, such as, you know, additional title succession laws, a Scandinavian elective, be it, for example, also something like dynasty, right? I would have really liked it had they added that instead. I think fairly lukewarm on that feature. Now here we have the shared head of faith. I think this is a stroke of genius. Another idea for a potential update direction right here is, of course, religion. What about councils? What about anti-popes? What about, you know, going into a direction that really takes a look at the hierarchical structure of the church, but also of, for example, the caliphate? If you think about it, then you will realize that the Aghlabites actually were, you know, governors in the name of the Abbasids. Were they really under their thumb? Absolutely not, but there was a relationship there on the religious/political level. And of course, in a similar fashion, we have the situation in, for example, the Catholic world. This could also act out the actual dialogue between Orthodox and Catholic Church. I'm not asking for a schism, for example. I think the schism has already been fully developed in this part of time. So in 867, it's basically already a de facto reality, although, of course, the historical dating of it puts it a bit low, behind or further back. But where I'm more coming from is that religious gameplay that allows faiths to interact with one another in a more complex manner would be something I would love, whether that is internally with anti-popes and such, or whether that is like here, the right tenet that makes it so that you will remain. You can now make your heresy and actually stay pretty friendly with your old folks. This means that, for example, let's say you're Basque, let's say you are in a situation where you have been fairly isolated the entire time and you would like to just have a slightly different church hierarchy. You can do that. Let's say that you are in a situation where you are Bohemian, where you are Polish and you have just freshly been converted. These peoples had very different rights until they further imported Latin priests that would then really push through the reality of the Catholic Church that unified them. this could be something that you could do with the right tenet and with a situation of, you know, a shared head of faith. This is a great feature. I love this one, and I would like it. Again, I talked about it first here with the governance. I talked about it here with internal politics, with the Dissolution Faction. I would love it if they took a look and said, you know what? We are going to take a look at all of the dynamics that religion brings, of course, in this era. Historical faiths can be emulated by using the right tenet, provided you don't meet certain red lines for your old head of faith. At the cost of a tenet slot, you can keep your old faith's head of faith while converting. Really good stuff. I think that's it for this dev diary. Indeed it is. Let's move on to number 100, A Royal Journey. Let's take a look at what they have to say right here. We are hard at work with the 1.6.1 update, where we are tweaking some balancing, fixing issues found by you in the community, and also adding in a few new goodies. More on that below. We're also working on a fix for those of you who can't start the game, the AVX issue, as I mentioned earlier, which will come out before the full 1.6.1 release, because obviously that is a much more pressing concern if somebody can't play the game at all. We're now setting our eyes on the future. We have many plans, both big and small. I cannot go into detail as it's too early yet, but rest assured that we have many exciting things coming up. We're taking a long, hard look at what we have done and achieved since the release of CK3. We're evaluating, adjusting, and setting a course that we're sure will be to your liking. I am curious as hell. I gotta tell you, I am curious as hell what it's going to be. CK3, oh my god, is it 2 years? It's gonna be 2 years in September. Jesus Christ, yeah, it's gonna be 2 years. It's 2 years old. Maybe we're gonna see another DLC, you know, update around quarter 3, quarter 4, right? But no matter how you look at it, there's still so much to come in CK3. And CK3, despite being 2 years old, still has infinite potential because of the Yomini layer. I played Stellaris the other day, or well, many other days. And I played Stellaris and I am so frustrated. I am so frustrated with Stellaris. Not having, for example, nested tooltips, not having the option of really getting value breakdowns like CK3 can do it. Not having the option of somebody just, you know, adding in some cheeky breaky GUI, because that is just so easy to do in CK3. It's crazy. Stellaris is a game that I absolutely love and I absolutely loathe, and man, CK3 is nowhere near that. By which I mean that Stellaris, I would be hyped for Stellaris 2 if they actually said, you know what, we have the technical jump forward with the Yomini layer and we want to apply that to Stellaris, but for that we need to make a new game. I would be ecstatic. For CK3, man, there's so much to come. There's so much to come. Very excited for that. Now, to round this dev diary off, we'd like to tease some new content coming along with the 1.6.1 update. We're adding a few religiously flavored events about Sephardic Jews, conversos, the direction of mosques, and so on, with interesting choices on how to handle various situations. More flavor for free. Big fan. Let's take a look at this one. Point of view. Wali Masood of Agramund has approached me today demanding that the recently converted mosque faces the wrong direction. As a former church, the mosque faces east, preventing the construction of a mihrab to guide followers to face the holy city. Wali Masood of Agramund argues that it is practically impossible to administer a proper service in these conditions and asks that we grant some funds to have the entire building rotated in the right direction. Right, funds to rotate a church. I like it. Outside of Hispania, and this is really cool, but still in the vicinity, we're doing a small update to the Canary Islands, who will, among other things, receive their own pagan faith and some monolithic ambitions. This is super cool. So Berber language, Berber heritage right here, and then we have the best faith symbol that you will ever see. Absolutely gorgeous. Just actually, I love that so much. Achaemanism. Megalithic constructions. Enables the construction of megaliths in temples, holdings, and great megaliths of duchy capitals. Advantage in hills +5. Development growth in hills terrain +15%. Holding taxes in hills, and levy size in hills +30%. Worship should not be done merely in the confines of a temple. These are the primitive constructions of man that distracts them from the divine creation surrounding us all. We embrace stone and the open air, arranging the stones that the Creator gave us in ways which please them and brings us closer to divinity. Really cool stuff. Big fan of this. That's just really neat. The next one fits in and hopefully explains why I really wanted to look at 98 outside of just talking about potential future ideas, because I do think this shows the issues, the concerns that I have when it comes to governance emulation in the game. We're adjusting how feudalization works in the Western African sphere, enabling rulers to transition out of the tribal government while retaining their native faiths without requiring them to reform those faiths. This is to better model methods of urbanization and centralization in West Africa, though they will also retain access to the old path too. This is the definition of a band-aid, right? It clearly makes things better. It should make it so. that West African, Sub-Saharan West African gameplay is in a much more organic and natural place. I think this, again, the only band-aid that I'm currently against are really tribal codes, but this one is good in what you can actually do with it, but it's clearly a band-aid. It makes it clear that the structure that the game has chosen and has brought over from CK2 between tribal and feudal and any of the other governance models at any given moment, you know, you could basically have an oligarchy pop up, you could have something more elective pop up, and the fundamental idea of that society would change. The core here of this band-aid is that West African development, societal development, does not actually work very well with the very European model of tribal to feudal, right? So the way I see it is, yes, this is a band-aid how you can get to feudal to then have progress in the game. It's a, again, much more organic way of playing the game, but it clearly doesn't befit the natural direction of, you know, the West African societies. And this is something that I think would be pretty cool if it got reworked, if instead it's not just, you know, hemmed into this, hey, you're tribal, you can either become clan or you can go and become feudal. No, instead it, you know, might have a bit of a more dynamic direction. I would love that. It's a big question of mine. Obviously, this band-aid is better than nothing, but it's still very much a band-aid. And I love this. I loved all of these whenever they posted them. Look at Alexander, the game director right here. Very, very cool. I am excited to see future updates. Let me know what you think about the DLC. Let me know what you think about the free patch. Let me know what you think about my hopes and dreams for future mechanics that may be introduced. For the moment, I'll leave you right here, and I'll see you later, alligator.